So, I don't know if you guys know this, just a little explain. We added a 7 o'clock mass in the parking lot. So you just stay in your car and you don't have to wear a mask. And some people don't like wearing masks. Just stay in your car, and the only time you have to wear a mask is during the 10 seconds of communion. So we do that at 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And one of our little old ladies who I just love, I gave her communion a couple weeks ago, and I gave her communion just in her car, and I did notice she was wearing a bathrobe, and part of me kind of like, really, you're dialing it in, right? You're just kind of at this point coasting, because with COVID, people have become a little bit relaxed, and I'm just saying maybe a little too relaxed. And so that actually got me thinking, because I get obsessive, and I started to think, no offense, about kids. Like, what about our kids? Are they going to be dialing it in too? And this, just part of my issue. I was always the kid that had their homework done, extra credit, and even I hated in high school when they would say, okay, now you people work together. I hate when my grade was dependent upon you, because I know I'm going to do my work, and I know some people don't do their work. And that's when I decided I will never be for communism. So I was thinking, I kind of worry about some kids that because of COVID and things getting canceled, whether they're just going to tread water, just kind of float along. And my position is, this is the time you want to kind of urge your kids to swim upstream. You want to lean into this and swim upstream. You don't want to float along. You want to try and learn, even if things are difficult. Or sports. Some sports are getting canceled. One of our parishioners just told their son his sport was canceled or postponed. But if that happens, you don't want to say, well, I guess I just won't work out. I say the opposite. This is not the time to coast. Even if your sport was canceled, continue to work out and practice and try and get better. So when it does get back on, when sports come through, you won't be out of shape. Sometimes you want to swim upstream. Or spiritually, the same thing. I just kind of wonder how many people, because of COVID, have kind of spiritually decided just to tread water and float. In this sense, and I know I'm very judgmental. You guys should have figured that out long before this. But I did run into some parishioners at the store who I mentioned, you can't go to Mass, you just have to socially distance and wear a mask when you're inside. And they said, well, we're just very concerned about COVID. And I said, well, if you're that concerned, you can still come to Mass in your own car. It's safer than being in the grocery store. But I just think people say, it's COVID, I can't do anything. I think this is a time to lean in. If you become too laxed, you'll lose it. Kids will use this as an excuse, and instead of being smart, they'll become a little bit more dim, a little bit more out of shape. Not only intellectually, physically, but also spiritually that could happen to us. And so, just as my opinion is this. In the gospel where Jesus says something just obnoxious, where he says, for those who have, more will be given. And for those who have little, the very little they have will be taken away. When you hear that, my first reaction is, that is not fair. If you're needy, shouldn't you be given more? And if you have more, why should we get even more? But it only makes sense in this COVID thing, that if you have little, if you're not even trying, then if you're just treading water, not even trying, the little intelligence you have or in shape you have or spirituality, you'll even have less. Does that make sense? You have some and you're really trying to work on it, maybe you could become smarter, faster, more spiritually depth. That's how it applies. And then he gives the parable about the sower and the seeds, which I love. And the sower is madly, just ridiculously generous. He is throwing seeds all over the place. And the seeds are God's grace. And they go everywhere. And that's the point. On all types of people, not just one denomination. God's grace goes over all people and all situations. So even in like hard times, whether it's COVID, maybe there's graces to be had during this difficult time of COVID. Maybe we just have to be open to them rather than think, well, God's graces will come when I'm lying on the beach in Maui, which hasn't happened yet. But like God's graces can be found in cancer and hard times. Some graces can actually only be given in hard times. Greater patience, resiliency. So God's graces are being thrown over all places, times, and people. And the seed, that's God's grace. The seed is powerful. Like if you read the story, if the seed lands on some good soil, it just blooms in huge amounts. Life just blooms. The seed is powerful. But think about this. The seed has to land on good soil to really bring forth life. So sometimes you've heard people say, oh no, all you got to do is accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. And Jesus does all the work. No, you have to make sure your heart is good soil. If you're wondering about the soils, there's 4 different soils. It symbolizes our heart. Good, rich soil, where if a seed lands on it, it produces a lot of life. So yeah, the seed is powerful, but we're in charge of what kind of soil it's going to land on. And you know the story. Some soil, it's hard. It has just a thin layer of soil and everything's hard underneath, so the seed will land on it and it'll sprout. But it doesn't have any depth, doesn't have any deep roots. So when hard times come, it'll dry up. Some people, it symbolizes people who are superficial. You're really superficial, then maybe you do have to get in there and, shovel and aerate the soil. I don't know, like kids don't do it today, but we had this huge garden. My mother loved having a huge garden, and then she made her children do all the work. And I once told her, I said, I think this is unfair. And she said, well, if I wanted to do it, I wouldn't have had children. But when it's hard soil, yeah, you need to take care of the soil, aerate it. If you're superficial, you want to get some depth. Or maybe your heart has a lot of weeds. The weeds are all the addictions in our life, whatever they are. They suck up all the good nutrients of the soil. And the seed might land on it, but it gets choked off because of all these other addictions. We're the ones who have to pull the weeds out of our own heart. And so think about this. The very parable, Jesus is kind of going back to, you have to be able to swim upstream. You have to work on your heart. Jesus isn't making it easy for us. He's asking us to lean into this. Make sure our hearts are rich. And then it says in the gospel that he's speaking in parables. He starts speaking in parables. And you hear this all the time where Jesus says, Jesus always spoke in parables. That's not true. He didn't always speak in parables. Actually, in the Gospel of Matthew, it's only halfway through he starts to speak in parables. And you have to think, why did he start halfway through speaking in parables? Because parables are hard. You have to think about what the parable means and apply it to your own life. Before that, he was kind of telling people what to do. And once again, he's making us swim upstream by trying to figure out the parable. It's kind of like one of our parishioners who's a friend, he's a grandfather, and he's mechanically gifted. He was with his son, who also is a mechanic, and he was watching his grandson. And his grandson was trying to figure out something, so the grandfather says, I'll go over and help him. And his son says, no, let him struggle. Let's see how he does. And the grandson figured it out. Unfortunately, if it was me, I'd still be there trying to figure out what goes into what. But the good father, yeah, you do make your kids struggle a little. Jesus starts speaking in parables because he wants us to masticate the fruit. He wants us to figure it out. You have to apply it to your own life. And so the parable is, sometimes you have to put a little spiritual work into it. Going back to his line, for those who have, more will be given. You put a little bit more work into it, and you'll have a rich harvest of life. You put no effort into it, and the little spirituality you have will drift away. During this COVID time, we actually want to lean into it. We want to become more spiritual. I just think because of COVID, intellectually, athletically, people are kind of drifting along. I know this is my criticism. Like the person who said, no, we're just going to watch it on our computer. You can go to the store, but you can't go to Mass even when we add a Mass, put one outside. How much of this is just drifting along? Does that make sense? And if you're not careful, the little you have may evaporate. You lean into it, teach your kids to swim upstream, even in this difficult time. Put out an effort spiritually. And maybe there's graces to be had during COVID. Maybe we'll have this rich harvest after all this craziness has ended. But God's graces are being thrown all over the place. And so together, let us stand and profess our faith.